Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Philosophy Roulette. This is number 37, where we just grab a random philosophy paper off the internet and review it. We just did this proving that the mind is not a machine, which is was good. It was using sort of a internal theory or whatever, the distinction between internal and external classical and non-classical theories of logic to make prove a point about Turing machines and if we could be one, because on the outside conception we can't, but on the inside conception, on the outside conception we can't say we aren't, but we can sort of assert that we aren't. We can't say it's true, but we can assert that we're not machines, though we can't say it's not true. There's always a trade-off when you're trying to do solve the liar paradox. There's going to be something that's going to go haywire. But I mean, it was cool to see it invoked in use for showing we're not machines. Okay, so there's a thought journal. We're doing analysis before, but now we went back to thought. A simple escape from moral twin Earth. It looks like it has enough downloads that it's actually going to be here, because if it's available, then people read it. It's amazing. So, escape from moral twin Earth. Let's update the infos for the peoples. If you're ever in, you can stop by and say, watch this live, you can just type exclamation point paper in the chat, and this link will pop right back up so you can follow along if you so choose. And there we are, we're back, up and running. So, a simple escape from moral twin Earth. Pekka Väyrynen of the University of Leeds. Introduction. Naturalist moral realism, NMR, says that some moral claims are true. Some moral claims are made so by objective stance, independent moral facts, and these moral facts fall into the class of natural facts. A moral realist must offer a metasemantics for moral language, a theory that predicts what properties moral terms will refer in various possible scenarios. Many versions of NMR deploy a causal theory of reference to explain how moral terms like good and right get to refer to certain natural properties. So if you're going to say something's natural, just like it's an electron, you get to say the word electron refers to the thing in physics that is electron. So if you're going to say something that is good, then you have to have something there that is good. That's the natural fact or whatever that you're referring to, okay, in the world, because it's natural. Certain natural properties. The essence of the moral twin Earth objection to natural moral realism is that although causal theories of reference are plausible for at least proper names and natural kinds, they're not a plausible metasemantics for moral terms. Okay. Because if like electron means electron here in this world, and that's sort of plausible if you're saying the good, but what if there's other worlds and other stuff, and so how do you know what you're actually talking about? Many philosophers think that MTE, moral twin Earth, objection makes any version of natural moral realism, NMR, which it touches, hopeless. Two standard moves on behalf of NMR are to A, diffuse the intuitions that drive MTE objection, or B, develop a semantics and or pragmatics of moral language which aims to avoid the problems of the MTE objection raised against NMR. In this paper, I'll first outline the MTE objection and then present a simple reply. The causal theory of reference for moral terms due to Boyd, a central original target of MTE, is in fact not vulnerable to MTE. So they missed the target even way back when in 1988, just before the last stock market major crash. Well, that's not to say the last one wasn't bad in 2008, but yeah, back in the 80s crash, which we are now in the COVID crash, for the Trump crash because completely unprepared for anything bad happening. We'll find out what happens. They just passed the stimulus plan, so we don't know if that's going to do enough, but we will find out if it does something. The stock market went back up yesterday. Super helpful to all people like me who have no money. The moral twin Earth objection. According to a causal theory of reference for a given term, the term has its reference determined by what its use is causally linked to in the appropriate way. This way doesn't require speakers to associate any identified description with the term. When appropriate causal links are in place, our uses of the term are causally regulated by the property that's the referent. Okay, so determined was causally linked. Not sure what causally linked in the appropriate way. This way it doesn't. Alright. We'll have to just see what that means, if anything. But it could just be a term of art and we're going to let it go. Putnam, 1975, asks us to imagine a twin Earth that's identical Earth, except that the stuff in their lakes, taps, and bodies isn't H2O but a chemical XYZ, whose surface qualities are very similar to H2O, but whose microstructure is radically different. So it looks like water, tastes like water, smells like water. I mean, it's basically, if it looks like the duck, it is the duck, except underneath, if you dig down, it's not like the same chemicals underneath. So it's XYZ, not H2O. Putnam argues that although we and our twins have nearly identical dispositions to apply our respective English and Twinglish, the twin English words, water to clear potable liquids in our environments, the strong intuition is that these uses of water refer to different properties, H2O in our case, XYZ in theirs. This is well explained if the reference water is used by a linguistic community is determined by what substance causally regulates their use of the term. Since that substance is H2O in our case, but XYZ on twin Earth, water refers to different substances on Earth and twin Earth. Horgan and Timmins argue that a moral twin Earth thought experiment, which closely parallels Putnam's twin Earth thought experiment, speaks against the view that the reference of moral terms is similarly determined by what their use is appropriately causally linked to. The denizens of moral twin Earth have a vocabulary that works very much like moral vocabulary on Earth. Those who speak twin Earth use terms like good, bad, right, and wrong to evaluate actions, persons, institutions, and so on. Twin Earthlings' use of these terms also bears the mark that are often invoked to characterize moral vocabulary and practice. Our twins use them to reason about considerations bearing on well-being and normally disposed to act in ways corresponding to judgments about what's good and right, normally regard what's good and right as particularly important to decide what to do, and so on. Yeah. So given that these terms play the same practical role as the orthographically identical English terms play in the moral practices of Earthlings who speak English, Earthling visitors to moral twin Earth should be strongly inclined to treat them as moral terms. However, such visitors would also notice significant differences regarding what sentences involving terms like good are affirmed by twin Earthlings. Earthlings, let's imagine, disposed to apply good to options which maximize overall happiness, disregard options which clearly bring about less overall happiness than some alternative, and resent other agents for taking options that fail to maximize overall happiness. By contrast, twin Earthlings are disposed to apply good to options they can will as a universal law, disregard objects they cannot will as a universal law, and resent others for taking such acts. So we happen to be consequentialists here on Earth, but the twin Earthlings are deontologists, which seems overly optimistic that everyone actually would agree to do something in the same way on either Earth or twin Earth. But that's okay for the course of this talk. The MTE objection supposes that given these differences, the two communities used good are actually causally regulated by different properties. A consequentialist property like maximizing net happiness for the consequentialist community C on Earth, and a deontological property like passing the categorical imperative test for the deontological community D on moral twin Earth. The causal theory then predicts that good has different reference in C and D, despite playing the same role in regulating deliberation and sentiments. Horgan and Timmins in cases like this claim that in cases like this, we have a clear intuition that good has the same referent in both communities. If I claim that a given act, killing an innocent person to save many lives, is good, and my twin claims it's not good, my twin is denying an ascription of the same property that I'm ascribing. The difference with twin earth intuition about water suggests that moral terms don't have the kind of metasemantics that Putnam offers for natural kind terms. Okay. So maybe there's a difference on moral stuff between the microstructure of physical terms like water and the moral terms like what is the good or not good. The general form of MTE objection is thus as follows. We describe two linguistic communities such that the causal theory of reference predicts that a moral term T C used by a linguistic community C above good earth, and a moral term TD used by linguistic community D, good on moral twin earth, refer to different properties even when the usage of these terms is otherwise as similar as possible. We then elicit a semantic intuition that if one person accepts something that is TC and another denies that is TD, they aren't referring to different properties. Since the causal theory conflicts with the semantic intuition, we should reject the causal theory along with any form of NMR that relies on it. Okay. Why Boyd's theory escapes the MTE objection. Let me just make sure I understand you. It's been clear enough. I'm just trying to make sure I'm on top of what's going on here. The escape pod for Boyd's theory of reference is an epistemic condition on reference which is typically not adequately registered in discussions of the MTE objection. Here is Boyd. Roughly, and for non-degenerate cases, a term T refers to a kind, properly, relation, etc., K, just in case there exists causal mechanisms whose tendency is to bring about over time that which is predicated of the term T will be approximately true of K. Excuse the blurring of the use-mentioned distinction. Yeah. When such causal links obtain between our use of good and moral goodness, our use is regulated by moral goodness in a way that enables our beliefs to increasingly to approximate truths regarding it as a result of subsequent moral and non-moral reasoning. This tendency may fail to be manifest when our beliefs are distorted by biases or other interfering factors. But degenerate cases aside, the causal links that are relevant to the reference of good must provide sufficient epistemic access to moral goodness to form the basis for the growth of knowledge about what is morally good. Yeah, so you have to be getting it right at least some of the time so that you can actually get somewhere. In less jargon-laden terms, yes please, roughly good refers to moral goodness just in case there are at least some people who under ordinary circumstances are at least pretty good at finding out about moral goodness and reflect this capacity in what they say using good. Yeah, so some that we're not terrible at understanding what's good. That's basically it. We are adequate at understanding the moral goodness in the world. It doesn't have to be all the time, not all the people, but we're at least as a community adequate in figuring this out. If we weren't, we wouldn't ever figure it out. If this kind of epistemic condition isn't met, our uses of good won't count as referring to moral goodness. Okay. I'll argue as follows. Communities C and D, I don't know who originated this line of reasoning that it's a pragmatic point. I know at least goes back to Peirce, that if we are to actually be able to do anything in this world, we actually have to be adequately decent at it. Otherwise, we would have just died off a long time ago. So if it has to do with abduction and figuring stuff out, like inference to the, I hate the best explanation, to any adequate explanation. So if we can make an inference to any adequate explanation, that's because we have that ability to actually not get it wrong all the time. We have to have an adequate access to adequate explanations. Yeah, the best part is a second problem. If you have a bunch of explanations, then you can pick a best one. But you have to have adequate ones that aren't crazy. Okay. But it's an interesting application to moral terms here. I hadn't thought about that before. Might be worth thinking about. I'll argue as follows. Community C and D must either converge in their subsequent uses of good or not. If they converge, no conflict arises with the semantic intuition Horgan and Timmons elicit in MTE scenarios. If they don't converge, it's no longer intuitively clear that C and D refer to the same property. Yeah, because if we're getting it right most of the time, but then there's divergence, maybe they're being right about two different things. So the adequacy condition here it does work. Okay. To begin, suppose that the consequentialist and deontological problems after which C's and D's uses of good pattern aren't coextensive. Now consider two scenarios. Convergence. C's subsequent moral reasoning takes its use of good closer to the deontological property, or D's subsequent moral reasoning takes its use closer to the consequentialist property, or subsequent moral reasoning in each converges toward a third property G. So in some sense, maybe they're two different paths, but they're all going sort of like the same way, but maybe not exactly not exactly, they don't always coincide, but they seem to be heading towards each other or towards some similar thing. And so maybe there's more than one path to the good, but the good itself is unique and distinct. And then there's divergence. The subsequent moral reasoning in C and D doesn't manifest convergence. Okay, so it's just not this. Consequential deontology ain't touching. So fine. In the relevant scenarios, neither convergence nor divergence occurs through chance or fluke. Again, this is appealing to that we're not messing this up. This is a sort of necessary condition. Divergence, for instance, is supposed to occur even in the absence of the sort of distorting influences on moral beliefs which may block a tendency to increasingly approximate moral truths, such as self-interest and various other biases. Yeah, this is sort of like a probabilistic rule. It doesn't always have to hold, but it has to hold in the long run. Nomologically. Boyd suggests that, given the subsequent convergence in moral beliefs, various historical divergences in moral views regarding the moral status of slavery, the divine right of kings, and more are plausibly interpreted as convergent scenarios where the earlier divergences reflect the influence of such distorting factors. Okay. So Boyd's just saying, hey, look, everything's going the same place, it's just proximal messes that we got ourselves into that caused us to diverge in our opinions. It seems kind of ad hoc, but it may be, there's probably a way to support this. So you'd have to just see what these claims actually are, but it's like, yeah, everything that diverged in the past is just a matter of historical accident. I mean, it sort of would play to the weakness of our theories, but or maybe not. Actually, I don't think. No, it would. I'd have to look at these arguments. But it does seem sort of ad hoc that just everything that has separated consequentialism and deontology is historical accident is kind of convenient for that argument. The epistemic condition on reference doesn't preclude the possibility of even serious errors about which properties determine how we in practice classify things under a term. What Boyd's restriction to non-degenerate cases does require is that the initial background beliefs of members of C and D are relevantly approximately true and their methods of reasoning are approximately reliable, since otherwise the tendency for their subsequent reasoning increasingly to approximate truth is undermined. Yeah, this is the adequacy thing. So when I said it was doing work, I actually got something right. It's fun to read things in real time and you're like, you don't know if what you say is going to be true, like it has anything to do with what's in the paper. So in the relevant convergence scenario, C and D both increasingly converge towards truth regarding moral goodness. Such a tendency leaves room for various sorts of differences. Two communities that have competing beliefs or theories about the same property can co-refer using good. Two communities can also have disputes over competing methodologies for inquiring into the nature of the same property. Okay, yeah, competing methodologies, basically. So you've got two different groups of people use different methods, but it's the same sort of thing, so it's like, that's fine. The MTE objection has little force under convergence on Boyd's theory. If C and D increasingly approximate moral truths in non-fluky ways, this is very likely because their uses of good are causally regulated by the same property, and their differences merely reflect some competing views about the nature of that property. But then NMR agrees that good has the same reference in C and D. Under divergence, however, each community's uses of good can increasingly approximate truths about moral goodness only up to a limit. Boyd's theory allows C and D to may refer to different properties if they would continue to differ significantly in their application of good, even without the influence of distorting factors. This is supposed to be the wrong result, so MTE objection seems more forceful in the divergent scenarios. Yeah, but I mean, convergence is sort of begging the question. I mean, both of these are sort of begging the question in one way or the other. Moral realism implies that in divergence, at most one of C and D is on the right track to truths regarding moral goodness. According to Boyd's theory, this means that at most one of C and D has its use of good causally regulated by moral goodness. Yeah, this is using our property of moral goodness to track whatever C and D are tracking, but that's fine. But it's like it's again a little question. Well, the setup, it's not question begging, it's just sort of understanding the setup here, and one setup is going to align with what we already thought, or what the natural moral realist already thought. The problem for the MTE objection is that if C and D don't end up approximating truths regarding moral goodness roughly equally closely, then the following symmetries between C and D cannot all hold, given the epistemic condition on reference. Yeah, but how do you know which one is what would be equally closely? What would it be to approximately be equally close? I don't understand. That's the whole point of the references. If you don't know what you're referencing, how would you be able to know which one they're approximating and how close they are to approximating it? Okay. Can hold given the episode on reference. Alright, 1. Good plays the same role in their practices. 2. Their initial beliefs about what's good approximate truth. Yeah, my objection is just probably what's going to get spelled out next, so it's not really an objection yet. Good plays the same role in their practices. Their initial beliefs about what's good approximate truths about moral goodness well enough to not compromise the subsequent growth of knowledge regarding moral goodness. 3. They're using roughly equal reliable methods of reasoning about what's morally good equally properly. 1 to 3 are core elements of convergent scenarios. Yeah. So we should expect at least one of them to fail in divergent scenarios. Yeah. But a nested trilemma shows that if one, but not the other community's subsequent reasoning about what's good fails to approximate truth regarding moral goodness through the failure of any one of 3, it is intuitively clear that good has the same reference in C and D. But the MTE objection requires us to be intuitively clear. Okay. So I see what they're doing. Alright, so let's continue. Yeah, the MTE is going to be not tracking the right references as well. So if you have, it has to have a tracking in the reference. Okay. So let them. I'm sure they'll spell that. What I just tried to gloss at, they'll spell it out. The MTE objection founders if divergence occurs through the failure of one, which is the same role in their practices. The intuition that C and D differ in their beliefs about what's good, but not in the reference of good, is heavily based on the stipulation that good plays the same practical role for each community. Yeah, so the reference has to be the same. Nor can divergence occur through failure of two. Putnam's original twin Earth scenario suggests that if the twin property were completely unfamiliar to us and satisfied no serious competing theory here on Earth about the nature of goodness, the intuition that good has the same reference in C and D would be undermined. But a significant difference between twin Earth and moral twin Earth scenarios is that while Earthlings have no causal contact with XYZ and twin Earthlings have no causal contact with H2O, members of C and D have causal contact between both the deontological and the consequentialist property. Many actions done in each instantiate or else fail to instantiate both properties. So we can expect each community's initial good beliefs to overlap significantly, irrespective of which property causally regulates their uses of good. Scenarios where each community's initial beliefs provide sufficient epistemic access to goodness to form the basis of the subsequent growth of moral knowledge are candidates for convergence. So if divergence occurs through failure of two, one of C and D must have more initial good beliefs which are false of moral goodness than the other, sufficiently many to lack the tendency to approximate truth regarding moral goodness through subsequent reasoning about what's good. But then it's no longer intuitively clear that C and D refer to the same property. We're supposed to imagine that two communities use equally reliable methods of reasoning about what's good from a partially shared stock of approximately true beliefs regarding what's good. One of them subsequently goes increasingly wrong regarding moral goodness in their beliefs, but not through fluke or bias, and yet good has the same reference in C and D. It's unclear what we're asked to imagine. Intuitions about such scenarios shouldn't be trusted. Yeah. So, trying to figure out exactly where the difference in like the semantic theory is here, because that's what it's coming down to. You're trying to do a semantics here between Earth and moral twin Earth and moral twin Earth, and the semantics aren't holding because of failures of these conditions. I think that the moral twin Earth objection is using the has to use a consistent semantics across everything, whereas the whole point is that the semantics come apart, so the objection uses the wrong semantics, as opposed to the objection being that the wrong semantics are used. Okay. Nor can divergence occur through the failure of three. Here we are supposed to imagine that each community's initial beliefs about what's good approximate moral truths closely enough to provide a basis for the growth of knowledge regarding moral goodness. One community's subsequent reasoning about what's good involves methods that aren't reliable with respect to moral goodness, but not through bias or fluke, and yet good co-refers in C and D. The community that fails increasingly to approximate truths regarding moral goodness despite having causal contact with whatever property in fact constitutes moral goodness won't merely have an inferior theory of that property that's compatible with convergence. But if we're to imagine the two communities don't use even roughly reliable methods for reasoning about moral goodness, it isn't intuitively clear that the uses of good co-refer. It isn't clear that their use of good discourse is aptly interpreted as involving reasoning about matters such as how we can effectively care about each other's well-being or flourishing in a socially rational way, or that good otherwise plays the same role. They might be using methods that are inappropriate for reasoning about what's morally good. Or they might be using the same method as their twins, such as reflective equilibrium perhaps, to inquire reliably into some property other than moral goodness, quoodness perhaps. Oh dear. Yeah. Using the QU locution. So like quos. Plus and quos. But then approximations to truth in their reasoning would be approximations regarding some property other than moral goodness. So, again, it isn't intuitively clear that good has the same reference in both communities, given what divergent scenarios must be like under Boyd's theory of reference. Yeah, so that's really what's coming down to, is understanding Boyd's theory of reference. A third option. One might object that Boyd's epistemic condition of reference is compatible with the third option. In MTA scenarios, the consequentialist and deontological property overlap in a wide range of cases, and good plays the same role in the practices of C and D. But now suppose that some acts which instantiate both the consequentialist and deontological property aren't called good by either community. Okay. C and D might then meet the epistemic condition by each coming to apply good accurate to these overlapping cases over time. Yay, so everyone's happy and agrees on what's good. Since they're improving in the same ways, their uses will be no less similar than they were at the start. And yet their uses of good might not converge. Outside the extensional overlap, C might apply good to C but not D actions, those that instantiate consequential but not deontological property, and D might apply to D but not C actions. Boyd's theory allows that good has a different reference in the two communities, but intuitively the reference is supposed to be the same. So the epistemic condition won't rule out all MTE scenarios that are problematic for NMR. Okay. This scenario isn't relevantly distinct, however. At least one of these communities will fail to approximate certain truths regarding moral goodness given their different beliefs about things that are C but not D and D but not C. For this to be a non-convergence scenario, something must make at least one community's use of good fail to be regulated by moral goodness. So this is an ambiguity problem or a vagueness problem? Okay, whatever. By moral goodness despite both having causal contact with the property that in fact constitutes moral goodness and applying good in some way that approximates truths regarding it. But now we have a divergence scenario and can rerun the arguments above. Let me just make sure I understood what happened here. Goodness by having causal contact. Okay, so yeah, you can set up some questionable things, but it looks like the author here is arguing that eventually you're going to have to pick convergence or divergence. Not relevant. One case fail. Okay. Yeah, so this is arguing for some sort of, it's going to be one or the other eventually. Even if it's ambiguous, I guess, to start with, where you're going to be in some sort of third way. It's eventually going to be one or the other things, I guess. But that's what the argument is. A natural worry concerns the interpretation of the epistemic condition. Yeah, vagueness or something. Boyd says that for the community's use of good to refer to moral goodness, they must approximate moral truths in such a way that it is possible to see how continued approximations would be forthcoming as a result of subsequent moral and non-moral reasoning. Reading this as requiring continued approximation to a complete set of truths about what things are morally good might be objectionably strong, given that the continued approximation is compatible with having many false beliefs. But the reply at hand doesn't require a strong reading like this. Consider things that are both C and D. Members of D will say that these things wouldn't be good if they were C but not D, and vice versa for members of C. Such dependence conditions are first-order moral claims. Compare kicking dogs wouldn't be bad if it didn't cause pain and suffering, and kicking dogs wouldn't be bad if we approved of it. Are first-order moral claims. So there would be many truths regarding moral goodness which at least one community is bound to fail to approximate, even with respect to the fact that in fact that things are in fact C and D, given a promising start in their beliefs about what's good. But differences in these kinds of moral beliefs are mostly naturally thought of as reflecting competing theories of the same property. Okay, so just different sides of the same coin. Because even if they disagree about what the moral property, the claim is, but they sort of, you still shouldn't kick dogs, or according to this thing. Standard formulations of the MTE objection against NMR target the causal theory reference from moral terms. I've argued that NMR can avoid the MTE objection once we take proper account of an epistemic condition, which was part of Boyd's causal metasemantics all along. The plausibility of an epistemic condition on referencing isn't something I can settle here, but the condition doesn't seem unmotivated. Boyd motivates the condition for at least theoretical terms, among which he counts moral terms, by noting that if the relations that are relevant to reference allow us to increasingly approximate truth, this helps to explain how our uses of theoretical terms and the associated classificatory practices contribute to the inductive and explanatory success of our theories. It also helps to explain why the fact that two linguistic communities apply different definitions or descriptive characterizations in using a term doesn't by itself show that they're referring to different things. A related idea is a fundamental connection between reference and epistemic justification. Yeah, this is where we're getting. This is sort of the thing. If a body of justified beliefs is about something, this guarantees that when the beliefs fail to match their objection, the situation is somehow unlucky. Yeah, this is the no biases issue. An epistemic condition on reference would follow naturally. If my argument is good, the MTE objection marks no advance over older semantic arguments against NMR, which appeal to the notion of referential stability. Moral terms are referentially stable if two terms that play the same conceptual role, such as perhaps regulating agents' deliberation and semantics in a certain way, are thereby guaranteed to have the same reference. One such older argument is R.M. Hare's argument against descriptivism based on his example of the missionary and the cannibals. We needn't invoke moral twin earth to ask whether NMR is committed to denying the referential stability of moral terms. Nor do we need to invoke it to assess whether denying their referential stability would be problematic. The related question of whether the practical role of moral terms could be explained in some way if NMR had to deny the referential stability of moral terms is also of broader significance. If referential stability can be resisted, then so can metaethical theories which imply it, such as many forms of expressivism and conceptual role semantics. It would thus be valuable to integrate discussions of what sort of metasemantics should go with NMR into broader metaethical context beyond the MTE objection. A more systematic treatment of the adequacy conditions for the metasemantics of moral language would be welcome in itself and might raise challenges that are less easy for moral realists to escape. And that's it. This was very nicely done. Yeah, this pragmatic condition is really everything that as I've said before, these people are very, very smart. If you're thinking something, it's because they want you to be thinking it. And so that there is this pragmatic condition that you've got this adequacy, like we have to be at least adequate in what we're doing in the world, or else we would not have survived this long, implies that we're actually referencing something somewhere at some time, like in some non-terrible amount of time. It's like with pretty good regularity, for whatever amount of amount that we need to be doing it good enough to get by. So that is forcing the semantics towards the reference, which is interesting. So they're using that adequacy claim in a way to make the semantics, to force the semantics to be at least adequate to track the references. And then once moral twin earth, and since there is no since these are sort of like abstract properties, even though they're natural, you can force the two different groups to be tracking the same property, unlike the just the plain twin earth with XYZ and H2O, because if like a scientist from Earth goes to moral twin earth and studies water, they won't find hydrogen and oxygen in water, they'll find X, Y, and Z. So it's a very this is a clever argument for the on the long line of semantics, and as said at the end, this might actually have wider implications because it doesn't need to be moral twin earth or morals. It could just be for any sort of abstract properties and semantics. Okay, so that was good. Let me know if you have any suggestions about what I should read next, or anything about the channel, broadcast more generally. Have a good day, stay safe, folks. Yep, bye-bye.